The LA Kings look to make it 2 wins in a row, and their goalie is looking to get some payback against his old team. We've got the backstory and details on that and more on this edition of Locked On LA Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, Kings fans, welcome to Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On LA Kings your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. We would love for you to leave us a positive comment on Apple Podcasts if you're a fan of the show. And we're on YouTube. Please like and subscribe if you're enjoying this content. I'm Eddie Garcia, your host of Locked On LA Kings. I've worked in sports media for the past 30 years, 20 plus years at the Fox Sports Radio Network. I'm also co-host of the Puck Podcast. It's a weekly NHL review show that's been putting out content for the past 17 years, and of course, a passionate LA Kings fan for over 30 years. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. Well, the LA Kings are back at it, looking to wrap up their mini 2-game road trip with a stop in the Twin Cities. It's the LA Kings against the Minnesota Wild coming up in just a bit, with LA looking to add to their win total, coming off their 5-1 victory over the Jets in Winnipeg, and new King P.L. Dubois getting a goal and helping his new team beat his old team. Now, the Kings come in with a 1-1-1 record. They're facing a Minnesota team that is 2-1. We'll tell you more about the Wild coming up in a bit, but some good things coming off that first win for the LA Kings. First and foremost was the performance of goalie Cam Talbot. We're going to get a lot more into Talbot in a moment, tell you why this game is not just another game for him. As for the Kings lineup tonight, doesn't look like we're going to see any changes from the Kings game in Winnipeg where they won their first game, so why would there be any changes? As far as the forward group, it looks like it's going to be the exact same that we saw again in Winnipeg. Andrei Kopitar centering the top line with Adrian Kempe and Quentin Byfield. Still looking for Kempe to get his first goal of the season after a 40-goal season a year ago. The second line, at least I think it's the second line, Pierre-Luc Dubois with Kevin Fiala and Alex Laferriere. Kevin Fiala looking for his first goal of the season, although he has racked up some points so far. The third line of Philip Deneau with Trevor Moore and Arthur Kaliyev. Of course, they were the top line last game. Had a great game against Winnipeg, leading the Kings to victory. And then the fourth line, the energy unit, you got Blake Lizotte with Carl Grundstrom and Trevor Lewis. A great start to the season so far for Carl Grundstrom. Let's talk a little bit more about Trevor Moore. We touched on this on Wednesday's show with special guest Austin Stanovich from the Hockey News. If you missed that, definitely go back and check out Wednesday's episode. But a bit of a surprise that the Kings' leading goal scorer right now through 3 games is Trevor Moore with 3 goals. Very nice start for Moore on a couple of different levels. Not only is he looking to bounce back personally from a season ago where he had just 10 goals and played 59 games because of some injury issues, but his early production is helping to absorb a bit of the offense that has been lost by the injury to forward Victor Arvidsson, who's out multiple weeks following the back surgery. And I'd like to see more, especially while he's hot right now, utilized more. I'd like to see him out there on the Kings' second power play unit. I'd like to see him out there on the Kings' penalty kill. He had 5 shorthanded goals 2 years ago when he had a career year with 17 goals. And when he's given the chance to get out there on the PK, he looks dangerous. And I think other teams notice that he is a threat. So I'd like to see him get a little bit more time on the PK. Sometimes those things are dictated by what line was out last after you take a penalty and things like that. But regardless, right now, Trevor Moore is playing some really good hockey, and it is great to see. And I kind of touched on this before, but is the Deneau line our second or our third line? I thought it was our second line, but I've been seeing a lot of articles and things about how great the Kings' third line is and how good they were specifically against Winnipeg. It doesn't really matter, but just something that caught my eye. But again, yeah, that line, whether it's our second or third line, the Deneau line was phenomenal against Winnipeg, with Deneau, Moore, and Kaliyev combining for 4 of the 5 goals against the Jets. That, if they are in fact our third line, that is great production from our third line. And we knew regardless going into the season, that was going to be one of the strengths. We talked about the depth down the middle with the addition of P.L. Dubois. So the third line, whether it's the Deneau line or the Dubois line, that's a line that more often than not should be an advantage for the LA Kings in games. It certainly was against Winnipeg. Hopefully that will continue to be the case going forward. I think as good as the Deneau line has been, I think it's safe to say we are still looking for more, though, from Adrian Kempe and Kevin Fiala. I'm not really worried about either, but it would be nice to see one or both get on the board tonight by lighting the lamp. So we'll see if that happens. As far as, again, the forwards, Jarrett Anderson-Dolan, the lone healthy scratch for the Kings as far as the forwards go. Looking at the defense for tonight, again, just the same lineup that we saw in Winnipeg, which is maybe a tiny bit of a surprise in one sense that we'll talk about in a moment. But you've got Drew Doughty and Mikey Anderson on the top pairing. You've got Matt Roy and Vladislav Gavrikov on the second pairing, and Andreas England with Jordan Spence on the third pairing. And after a bad game against Carolina, where he took 3 bad penalties, good to see Matt Roy bounce back with his typical solid game against the Winnipeg Jets. We didn't talk about it much on Wednesday's show, but how about the fight that Kings defenseman Andreas Englund got into? Now, if you didn't see the game, Englund had a hit from behind on Winnipeg's Cole Perfetti. I actually thought it should have been a penalty. He got away with it. But the Jets' Dylan Sandberg, being a good teammate, stepped in to try and have Perfetti's back and went after Andreas Englund. And Englund flat out nailed him with 2 right hands and really stunned Sandberg. He actually ended up being bloodied and had to go off the ice for repairs. So England's play defensively, I think, has been passable. But I know some Kings fans were worried about a certain element of the Kings game not being there with the losses of players like Brendan Lemieux and Zach McEwen. If that fight with Dylan Sandberg is any indication, Andreas Englund can more than hold his own because those were 2 big right hands that stunned another player on the other team that is a player that can do that kind of thing. So he does bring that element for the LA Kings, whether he's standing up for himself or one of his teammates. He can certainly, he's got a right hand that you got to look out for if you're going to get into it with big Andreas Englund. But I actually would have liked to have seen Tobias Bjornfoot in the lineup on that left side on the third pairing tonight. I think that these guys should kind of alternate starts, maybe push each other in a bit of a friendly competition. I mean, if you're going to have Tobias Bjornfoot up as the extra defenseman, why not play him? I don't know that the Minnesota Wild are necessarily an overly physical team. You might think of that type of a situation where you would prefer England over Bjornfoot, but the Wild they're not known as being a big, tough physical team. So I don't think that is a factor. So I would have preferred to see Tobias Bjornfoot get in the lineup to see what he can do, but it is going to be Andreas Englund again. And I guess the thinking is from head coach Todd McClellan, we just won a game. We played pretty well, at least the second and third periods. Why change anything? And I guess I certainly understand that. And along those lines is the goaltender for tonight for the LA Kings. It's going to be Cam Talbot back in net. And I'll tell you why Cam Talbot is getting to do, or is looking to do, a little bit of what Pierre-Luc Dubois did in the game against Winnipeg. There is an interesting backstory here. It is something to keep in mind for tonight's game. We will talk about that and more here on next on Locked on LA Kings, your team every day. Snap into action this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That is $200 in a bonus bet, win or lose. That's $200 in a bonus bet. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there is no better time to get in on the action than now. The app is super easy to use. There is a wide range of betting options, including point spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. Obviously, we love betting on the NFL, but what about the NHL? Yeah, you could do that on FanDuel. And our LA Kings are underdogs tonight in Minnesota. LA is getting 1.5 goals in the point spread against the Wild. The over-under for the game is 6.5 goals. Want to place a bet on the Kings to win? Think the game will have more or less than 6.5 goals? Well, visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and bet all season long on the NHL or the NFL as well. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. The LA Kings play the Minnesota Wild this evening, 5 p.m. Pacific time. Catch every moment of the hometown broadcast of the LA Kings road game in Minnesota on Sirius XM on the SXM app. Search LA Kings. By the way, bad job by me. I did not give out our Locked On Kings 3 stars of the night for the win over the Winnipeg Jets. We should have done that on our Wednesday show when we recapped the game. I was thrown off a bit because we had a special guest to recap that game, and that normally doesn't happen. So I'll blame that. I'm not blaming Austin, by the way. I'm blaming myself. But the 3 stars for the Kings' first win of the season against Winnipeg. Number 3, I'm going to go with Phillip Danault. A goal and 2 assists. Loved his sweet backhand pass in front of the net to Trevor Moore on his first goal. That was a beautiful pass. So number 3 star, Phillip Danault. Number 2 star is Trevor Moore for his 2 goals and his 1 assist. Love his start to the season so far. Number 2 star. And the number 1 star for me, Trevor Moore certainly could have been a candidate, but Cam Talbot in net for the Kings. He allowed 1 goal on 27 shots, but he was outstanding in the first period. If not for Talbot, the Kings would have had to dig themselves out of a hole for another game. He stood tall in that opening period, made 14 saves in the first period alone, ended up making 14 saves combined in the second and third. So Cam Talbot, a great effort for him. If we see more of that this season, we're going to be very happy with our goaltending. But Cam Talbot, my number 1 star in the win over Winnipeg. And speaking of goaltending, smooth transition. I asked Austin Stanovich of the Hockey News on Wednesday if Cam Talbot needed to get the start against Minnesota in the next game, and he said that he wouldn't be surprised if Phoenix Copley got the start, as the Kings might be looking to alternate goalies until one of these guys establishes themselves. And I totally get his point, but I would have been totally shocked and frankly disappointed if Cam Talbot did not get the start in net today against the Minnesota Wild, mostly because of his performance against the Jets. He absolutely earned the next start. And I get that it's early in the season. I get that the Kings have told Cam Talbot, in the first game of the season, you're going to start, but Phoenix Copley is going to play in that second game. And at some point, yes, you do need to get Phoenix Copley some reps, but not after that performance by Cam Talbot against Winnipeg. You have to play Talbot in net the next game 100% of the time. When he puts out an effort like that, you need to reward your goaltender for that. And I'm glad to see he's getting rewarded. Plus, even if Talbot had not had an outstanding performance against Winnipeg, if he just was okay and got the win, if I'm Todd McClellan, I am absolutely starting him in this game because he is facing his old team, the Minnesota Wild. And Cam Talbot would probably not admit this, but he still has an axe to grind against Minnesota. For those of you that don't know, here's the backstory. Cam Talbot played 2 seasons in Minnesota, and his last season there 2 years ago, he was really good. Maybe played the best hockey of his career. He had a record in 2021-22 of 32-12-0 in 48 starts, second most wins he's ever had in a single season, and his best career winning percentage by far as wins to number of starts that he had. He backstopped the Wild into the playoffs only to be replaced by trade deadline pickup and future Hall of Famer Marc-Andre Fleury. Kind of similar to what happened to Phoenix Copley with Jonas Korpisalo with the Kings last season. Now, Wild GM Bill Guerin clearly didn't believe that Cam Talbot was the guy to get the Wild deep into the playoffs, and we'll talk about the Wild's playoff history coming up. But as you can imagine, this did not sit well with Cam Talbot, who demanded a trade. He got his wish. He was shipped off the next year to the Ottawa Senators, where he struggled with injury. It affected his play. The team in front of him wasn't very good, and it wasn't a great season for Cam Talbot. Now, tonight will be Cam Talbot's first game back against the Minnesota Wild since he was traded last season in Ottawa. He did not get a chance to face his old team. So I am sure, Cam Talbot, he doesn't have any ill will towards his former teammates, just like Pierre Dubois didn't have any ill will towards his former teammates in Winnipeg. And a little bit of a different situation. I don't think the fans in Minnesota are going to, boo Cam Talbot or care about him returning the way the Jets fans did, because Pierre-Luc Dubois did make it known he wasn't going to re-sign in Winnipeg. And so the fans are like, whoa, we're not good enough for you. Why don't you want to play for us? Blah, blah, blah. So there was that animosity between the fans and Dubois, and that's why we heard some boos in Winnipeg when Pierre-Luc Dubois touched the puck. Not going to be the case tonight. Of course, it's a different situation. It's hard to boo a goalie. I guess what do you boo every time he makes a save? So I don't think there's going to be any public display of displeasure from the fans in Minnesota tonight with Cam Talbot. And again, he doesn't have anything against his former teammates, but he does have something against the organization and specifically GM Bill Guerin, who he felt like he was unfairly treated by Bill Guerin. So he absolutely, I believe, wants to desperately win this game tonight to kind of stick it to Bill Guerin. And, you know, if you think players in all sports don't use these types of things as motivation, you're crazy. It absolutely happens. And I guarantee you, again, I'm sure Cam Talbot's going to say all the right things, has said all the right things before the game if he's asked about it. He'll say it's in the past and, you know, that was then, this is now, I'm just focusing on helping my new team. I guarantee you, he still feels that he was treated unfairly, got shipped off to Ottawa, and now here he is coming back against his old team for the first time with a much better team that he is playing behind, having coming off his best performance as a King. Obviously, it's very early, but again, I think if Todd McClellan is reading the room, and I assume he is, because coaches, they pay attention to things like this as well. What motivates your player? At least good coaches do. And knowing the history between Cam Talbot and Minnesota, and of course, coming off a great performance, had to start him in this game tonight. Absolutely had to start Cam Talbot. If you don't start him, then you're kind of, you know, you don't know what's going on. You're not reading the room. So I absolutely think Cam Talbot had to start tonight, and looking forward to that kind of underlying storyline in tonight's game. Cam Talbot, it's personal for him tonight against the Minnesota Wild. Again, not the guys on the ice necessarily, but the organization that shipped him off and treated him unfairly and didn't let him start in the playoffs when he carried them into the playoffs a couple years ago, or at least was a big reason why they got into the playoffs. So again, extra motivation for Cam Talbot tonight, something to definitely keep an eye on in tonight's game for Cam Talbot and the LA Kings. Now, what do we want to see from the LA Kings tonight? And we'll also give you a scouting report on the Minnesota Wild. That's coming up next here on Locked on LA Kings, your team every day. Are you one of those people that is prepared? I'm not, but thankfully I have a wife that is. She's got an earthquake kit and she's always preparing for things. I kind of make fun of her sometimes, and then something happens and I realize how smart she is and how stupid I am. I know she would love the Jase case. Now, what is that, you ask? The Jase case is a personalized emergency medication kit that contains 5 essential antibiotics that treat the most common and deadly bacterial infections. Goodness knows that in the world we live in today, we never know what can happen from day to day, and we learned that with the pandemic. And of course, when things happen, it can lead to supply chain shortages for medications. With the Jase case, you can customize your case and add additional life-saving medications based on your unique needs. Choose the medication that best fits you and your family. Jase is continually working to expand their medication offerings, and you can buy a gift card for family and loved ones so that they can get a Jase case of their own. And I mean, when you think about it, that's a great gift. I mean, you're giving someone, a chance to be healthy or treat their loved ones in case of an emergency. So go to jasemedical.com, enter the code locked on at checkout, and get $20 in a discount off of your order. That's promo code locked on at Jase, Jase medical.com. The LA Kings play the Minnesota Wild this evening, 5 p.m. Pacific time. Catch every moment of the hometown broadcast of the LA Kings on the road with SiriusXM on the SXM app. Search LA Kings. So what do we want to see from the LA Kings tonight? Well, we're going to keep talking about this until it happens. We want to see the Kings get off to a good start. The Kings fell behind 3-0 in each of the first 2 games of the season. Now, they didn't fall behind in Winnipeg, as we told you, thanks in large part to goalie Cam Talbot. They could have easily been behind 2-0 after that first period, if not for the great effort from Cam Talbot to keep it scoreless. Now, the Kings were able to turn things around, and they have been a much better team in the second and third periods so far, and that's great. And you could say, well, who cares? As long as the Kings win, does it really matter if they get off to a good start? Well, it does. And I'll tell you why in a minute. But the Kings, just 1 goal in their first 3 periods of action so far on this young season. And again, the good news is the Kings have been good in the second and the third, but we need a complete 3 periods from the LA Kings. Why? Because you got to look bigger picture here. The Kings want to advance in the playoffs. It's all we've been talking about. That's the goal of the team, not just make the playoffs, advance. And if you're going to advance in playoff hockey, you can't play just 2 periods. You've got to play 3 periods. You need to not fall behind early. So this is about setting a tone for the rest of the season. The Kings need to focus on getting better starts, playing better first periods, getting out of the gate stronger, and then hopefully they won't have to battle from behind and claw their way out of a hole and continue to play those good second and third periods, get a complete 3-period game together, and they should, that should result in success this season. So let's see the Kings get that first goal and then carry it on, hopefully, to another win. I think we also want to see a better effort out of the Kings' number 1 power play unit. So far, the Kings have 3 power play goals on the season. They're kind of middle of the pack very early on as far as the rankings go, as far as team power plays. Of course, they were 4th in the NHL at the end of last season. But the number 1 power play unit, which has got a lot of star power on it, has only 1 power play goal so far this season. The second unit actually has 2 of the 3 goals so far, which is a little bit surprising because they've seen some shuffling, adding in Jordan Spence and now Arthur Kaliyev as well. So that top unit of Andre Kopitar and Adrian Kempe and Kevin Fiala, we need to see more production out of them. And I mentioned it earlier, Adrian Kempe and Kevin Fiala each still looking for their first goals of the season. It would be nice to see those 2 guys, or at least one of them, get on the board, and it would be also nice to see them do it on that Kings number 1 power play unit. It's looked good so far from what I could see. They're moving the puck around well, but they still need to get those high scoring chances in the high danger areas. It's nice to move the puck around, but it needs to result in better scoring chances. So hopefully the Kings power play looks a little bit better tonight against the Minnesota Wild. As for the penalty kill, which is going to be a focus all season long, as you well know, so far so good. We did talk about this a little bit on Wednesday's show with Austin Stanovich. Kings have been shorthanded 12 times this season. They've killed off 11 of those 12 power play chances against them. So the Kings penalty kill looking good so far. It's been more aggressive. But again, let's keep it going and see if that PK and the special teams can be better overall, especially on the power play tonight against Minnesota. I do want to give you a quick scouting report on the Minnesota Wild. As I mentioned earlier, they come into the game with a 2-1 record. They had a 2-0 shutout win over Florida and a 5-2 win over Montreal. Their one loss came to Toronto. 7-4 was the final. And this is a team looking to do what the Kings are looking to do this year, and that is advance in the playoffs. Minnesota is consistently a playoff team. They've been in the playoffs 10 of the last 11 seasons, but they have not won a playoff series since 2015. That is 7 straight years of losing in the first round. The Wild made the playoffs last season. They were out in 6 games in the first round against the Dallas Stars. They are led by star Kirill Kaprizov, who seems to love to play against the LA Kings. In 14 career games against LA, he's got 14 points, 8 goals. That's the highest number of goals against any non-division opponent. He's a +7 against the LA Kings, so he's a guy to keep an eye out for, and the Kings need to focus on. Kaprizov, as well as Matt Zuccarello right now, are tied for the team lead in points with 5. Their leading goal scorer right now for Minnesota is Joel Eriksson Ek. He's got 3 goals. Their captain, defenseman Jared Spurgeon, is currently out of the lineup due to injury. Their goalies right now, Philip Gustafsson and future Hall of Famer Marc-Andre Fleury. Now, Philip Gustafsson was the guy that Cam Talbot was traded for with Ottawa, and he's come to Minnesota and has done a very good job. So the Wild are actually pretty happy with the trading of Cam Talbot to get a much younger and productive goaltender in Philip Gustafsson. However, adding a little bit more spice to the matchup tonight, reports are Marc-Andre Fleury is going to get the start in net for Minnesota, the man who the Wild chose to start in the playoffs 2 years ago over Cam Talbot. So again, a little extra in this matchup. It's going to be Marc-Andre Fleury against Cam Talbot. And for Marc-Andre Fleury, I think he's getting the start because he had a really good outing in his last game. He stopped 26 of 28 shots against Montreal. Actually got a standing ovation from the road crowd because Marc-Andre Fleury, future Hall of Famer, this could be his last season in the NHL. He's from Quebec, and the Montreal fans gave him a standing ovation in what was probably his last start in that city. So Real interesting goalie matchup tonight. Cam Talbot against Marc-Andre Fleury. Just a little bit more spice, like I said, for this matchup tonight. And one more note to pass along to you before we wrap up the show. Congratulations early to LA Kings captain Anze Kopitar. Once the puck drops tonight, he will have played in 1,295 games, all in an LA Kings sweater, and he will have tied Dustin Brown for the most games played in franchise history. So stick tap to the captain of the LA Kings, going to be tied for the most games played in a Kings uniform coming up tonight. Should be a good game. Looking forward to talking about another Kings win on Friday's show for you everydayers, those of you that listen and watch Locked On LA Kings every day. Coming up on tomorrow's show, we're going to recap, of course, the game against the Wild, and it's another LA Kings fan feedback show. We do that every Friday. Your questions, your comments about the LA Kings this week and all season long. If you want to send an email and be a part of that show, the email address is lockedoneddie@gmail.com, EDDIE. And we're also, of course, on YouTube. If you want to post your comments on the YouTube episodes, I definitely read all those comments, so you can certainly do that as well. And if you want to stay interactive with the show, you can follow us on X or Twitter and Instagram as well. We are at Locked On LA Kings in both of those places. All right, I'm Eddie Garcia. Looking forward to tonight's game against Minnesota. Looking forward to talking about a Kings win tomorrow. Thank you, as always, for listening and watching this episode of Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Have a great day. We'll talk to you on Friday. And as always, go Kings, go.